Hi. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Have you been doing? Have you had lunch? Some people are saying yes, some people are saying no. What is the case? I'll act like I did not hear you. Anyway, let's get straight into business. Today, we're going to be discussing something very interesting. If you are a technical writer, you work in product manager, you manage any form of documentation in your company, we're going to be discussing something very key and important into your entire product lifecycle for your documentation. So, I titled this talk, Optimizing Your Docs in the GEO Era, Writing for People and Machines. Aha. She already read a very long bio, so I'll just probably skip this. But I currently work at Rocket.chat. I've been a technical writer at Rocket.chat. In approximately 3 weeks, I will be 3 years in Rocket.chat. Thank you. Other times, you would see me doing work around open source, communities, GDG like this, DevFest across different states in Nigeria. And I like to tell my friends that just maybe, if AI takes my job, I'll go into finance. So, let's go straight into business. Hands up if you've ever, everybody's into hands up, but hands up if you've ever gone to ChatGPT or Gemini first instead of reading the documentation for your product. Why? Be proud of your... Don't be embarrassed. It's a safe space, okay? So before even going to read the documentation, you've already gone to ask ChatGPT because you know it's going to give you a very quick answer, right? Good. So we're going to go on a very brief journey today as to how the way we read documentation has changed and how, as a company, your process has to change. Because now you know that people are not going to be reading your docs first. They're going to be asking LLMs first. So you have to move from writing just for the user to writing now for the user and for LLMs. Are we good? Awesome. So let's go through a brief journey, how people have been searching. So before now, it used to be a very tedious task if you're searching for information on the search engine. If you ask for A, the search engines are going to give you A. If you ask for B, the search engines are going to give you B. Sometimes you have to go through various, for those that are developers here, various libraries. You're trying to look for information. Documentation was such a hard thing. For those who are engineering or doing technical stuff like 5-10 years ago, it was so hard, information was so complex to find. And then slowly, Google started ranking search engine results. Did we have any set of people in this room who did all these guest author programs like LogRocket? You wrote for all these companies where you're going to write an article for them, and then they pay you contractual style. Or maybe they didn't pay you, but you wrote for guest author blogs. Anybody like that in the room? Are you trying to raise your hand? No. Okay, cool. Great. So once upon a time as well, we had a few set of people companies who were so interested in improving their SEO, were now doing something called guest author programs. So for example, I wrote for Twilio. And now Twilio is a core service and VoIP providing. They do a lot of things around communication. But Twilio can be integrated in Laravel, it can be integrated in Java, it can be integrated in multiple languages. What Twilio was doing was, if you're so good and you can write technical articles around back-end concepts, or sometimes front-end concepts, something that is relatable, come write for us. We will publish your article in our blog, in your name, and then you get paid. You don't have to be working with us full-time. Why were they doing this? What happens is, if I was searching for maybe how to do XYZ with Laravel, I wasn't necessarily searching for Twilio. I'm going to see the article I wrote on Twilio pop up. And as a user, in between those articles, you would then see all of their ads, all of their sections, all of their callouts talking about Twilio, relating what you have written to what Twilio does. What that does for them is it brings them more to the customer faces. What happens is if you're trying to search for something that's not related to Twilio, that article might just come up. So SEO. Then there was page ranking. So let's go into what the SEO era was looking like. That was where a lot of companies were competing for first page. So if somebody searched for something, I want to be on the first set of results that somebody will see. Because think about it. How many of you have ever gone to the second search results? You know how you print out results from Google and then there's page 2, page 3. When last did you press page 2? I don't think I've ever done that in like over 2 years. I can't remember doing that. So yeah, companies are fighting to be on that first page. So SEO was all about making content easy for crawlers, for different kind of people to fetch information. So for the past 20 years, this has been the primary goal of companies. Oh my God, we want to get our SEO game on point. And that is why for the longest time, for technical writing, guest author programs were kind of like the big deal. You could be working in a company and getting peanuts, but you write for like 5 companies in a month and you're actually getting cool cash in dollars. Until this guy came, the GEO era. So now, SEO era was search engine optimization. Everybody was fighting for search engine results. But now we're in an era where people don't really care. They don't. They literally, whoever invented ChatGPT, Gemini, I just wish that ChatGPT was very prominent when I was doing final year. I think I would have had an A in my projects. But anyways, that's by the way. So the GEO era, this is now we're in a place called generative engine optimization, which means people are not going to Google to find results anymore. People are not scrambling to find your docs on Google. They're struggling to find it on ChatGPT. They're struggling to find it on Gemini. So, a simple diagram to explain where we're at. As a developer, you're most likely going to ask the LLM first, oh, how do I do XYZ in Postman? And then if you get the answers you need, you're just going to go down and you're done with the task and go back. You're never going to visit the docs. You only go to the docs if ChatGPT is being, as usual, dumb or sometimes, but it's being the usual, for lack of a better word. You only go to the docs if you don't get exactly the answer that you're looking for. And that's what's going to prompt you to say, let's look at the documentation and actually see what the docs is saying. But if you get the accurate answers from LLM, you're good. But now the issue is a lot of people, if they feel like, if a whole machine cannot understand it, who am I to go to your almighty docs to understand it? So today we're just going to be going through a few things around how you can optimize the docs that you have already written for people to work for machines. Because the biggest issue that we have found is people search for things around your product and they get maybe accurate answers, but they are half-baked. And so the users are running into errors. So traditional search engines like before, they give you a lot of links to explore. You search Google, you get some results. But now, AI is doing the reading, the sourcing, and its job is just to provide you synthesized answers, very straight to the point. Sometimes Gemini can overtalk, but yeah, straight to the point. So the battle now for you as a company or for your product is not to appear on search engine results. The battle now is to make sure that you appear properly and your product appears properly on LLMs. So why is this important? If your docs does not surface in AI outputs, your project can disappear, meaning that if people really depend on LLMs and they get frustrated while trying to search about information in your product, people may it will create a huge gap where you will find developers leaving your products. And then the new reality is that you just have to, if you're building anything in the room, you just have to write for both machines and then for humans. So how LLMs are reading docs. So we're going to go through how exactly does LLM read docs, and then what can we do to make sure that our docs are reading accordingly. How many of us are very familiar with, before I go to the next screen, very familiar with the concept of RAG? We probably will be hearing it all across DevFest for the next few days. But how many of us are very familiar with the concept of RAG? Okay, familiar is not the word. Have heard the word RAG. Okay. Do we have anybody who could like echo an answer to us? Like, what is RAG? Retrieval what? You're not confident of your answer, I'm sorry. Retrieval what? Augmented generation. Great. So, for humans, we read linearly. Do you remember all of those very funny posts on WhatsApp where they will give you something to read and they will miss a word, but your brain will somehow interpret that if there was a missing R, your brain figures that out easily, right? So we skim read, we easily infer things, we easily fill in the gap. But for LLMs, it's different. They read things in a way called, they break your documentation into chunks. And we're going to go into details into how the RAG concept works very briefly. But they break your documentation into chunks, and they only retrieve the results or the chunks that are related to the query that the user has asked. So they're not always the best at hallucinating, because if you leave them to hallucinate, for somebody like Gemini that likes to overtalk, he's going to give you even the things that you don't need. They're not very good when it comes to ambiguous words. So, we're just going to run through this briefly because this is not the core focus. But when a user asks your documentation for a certain information, it's probably going to go in through this series behind the scenes. First of all, integration and chunking. It means it's going to go and find, first of all, your documentation is broken down into different chunks in a way that is easy for machines to read. Remember that machines, they don't read linearly like you do. So it's breaking down into chunks. And then there's something called embedding and vectorization, such that it's easy for when search is happening, retrieval is easy. So if I'm searching for something, I just know that I'm looking for this set of chunks. And then I bring it out, I return it back to Gemini or ChatGPT or whatever the LLM is, and then it refines the answer and provides it to the user. So that's what these whole steps here signifies, from vectorization to retrieval and finally grounding, where the final answer is provided to the user. So this is the actual work. How? So we've talked about, SEA is a problem, GEO is a problem. People are not seeing my documentation. How exactly do I now write to adapt to not just humans? Because as technical writers, or if you're doing anything documentation, you can get very overwhelmed with structural appealing. I want it to be very structurally appealing, easy to understand for humans, but then we forget the machines. So how do we write for the dual audience? First thing that we're going to discuss is clarity and conciseness. A lot of times, people always assume that because they've defined an acronym in page 1, it's okay to leave it like that all across the docs. The very first thing that you will need to know is that LLMs, they rely on patterns a lot. So when they see something consistently happening, they rely on it, they know that, okay, they're very sure of their answer. So you want to be always clear. So if you have any acronyms in your docs, do not leave them ambiguous, clarify them. Use very clear languages. If you're doing something extremely technical, do not leave any space for ambiguities like dependencies. Don't expect that the reader will know if you did not properly define your audience at the beginning of the docs. Don't expect that they know the concept in JavaScript. Don't expect that they know one behind the terms dependency or how it works. Be as strategic as possible. Provide as much information as you can without being verbose. So we're going to take a quick test. I have 2 examples. I deliberately did not put which is the bad and the good, but I think we will pretty get it. So for clarity and conciseness, between option 1 and 2, which do you think that will be much more better when you're writing to optimize your docs? You might want to think about using this function to get data if you're ready, or use fetch data to retrieve user configuration details. Option 1 or 2? Option 1 or 2? Option 2. Great. So now the next thing is the documentation structure. A big part of the issue that we have had over time in the industry is people not understanding, even from SEO era, how semantic structuring works. So you see a lot of people using H2 tags or heading 2 tags when they probably used heading 3 above. There is no I hope you know that there's a reason that it's called H1, H2, H3, and it's not just because it looks bigger. It's because there's a way that it's been indexed even by search engines and now by LLMs. So sometimes your AI or your LLMs is not exactly reading the titles, it's reading the order in which the title comes. So as an LLM, if I see heading 3 under a heading 2, I know that this particular concept is still related to heading 2. So it's very important. A lot of product or documentation make this mistake. It's very, very important to structure your headings properly. Semantic structuring, very important. So dedicate H2, H3 to very core concepts and very core tasks. And then this other point is very important. I cannot overemphasize. As opposed to keeping your titles very slim and fancy, like working with API management, you have to now start optimizing your titles to match the user query. So before you structure a heading, think about it. What exactly are my users going to be asking? Are they going to be asking API management, or are they going to be asking, how do I XYZ? You want to make sure that the headings are actionable. So structure your titles to match natural language queries. And we just have a very nice, sweet, again, very easy example right here. Option 1, working with webhooks. Option 2, how to create and test webhooks in Rocket.chat. Which will be the better options for LLMs? And even users, which will be the better option? Option 2. And you can clearly see why. There's nothing wrong with writing, working with webhooks as a heading, because everybody knows you're working with in a Rocket.chat page. But the issue here is that you now have LLMs breaking down your docs, and they need to understand it better. If not, they're always going to be providing wrong answers to your users. And now, this is the one I love so much. For your APIs, a lot of products and a lot of tools, we're still in the age where we are using text for our APIs. We're using human text. We just put a table and say, this is the API endpoints, this is the parameter, this is the XYZ. How many of us are familiar with the concept of OpenAPI? I think let's start from there. OpenAPI, great, just a few people. Slowly, for LLMs, we're gravitating to the point where OpenAPI is becoming necessary. Not just OpenAPI, but any API referencing that structures or that captures your API documentation in structured data, whether it's JSON or YAML. Because what happens is that it's very much easy for LLMs to read structured data than unstructured data. They have less work to do when they're breaking down your APIs. And then a couple of other points that are very important is examples. Thousands of documentation right now are missing good examples and examples per use case. So we have a case where you have an endpoint that is providing one kind of response, but there are multiple use cases. Remember that earlier we have said that you should leave no space for ambiguity, so don't allow the user to be guessing. Once a user starts to double guess your docs, something is wrong. Add descriptive comments in the code blocks, especially when you're dealing with very large code blocks. Add descriptive comments. And then always make sure that your parameter and your example formats are consistent across all page. So we've talked about how you can do this in terms of writing. Writing the docs is one thing for LLM. The second thing is, how about structure? How about metadata? What can we do in that regard? So for the technical writers in your company, oh, I've made all my headings right. My headings are actionable. There's no ambiguity. I'm clear. I'm concise with my documentation. But for some reason, these LLMs still don't catch the gist. I have a few new things to show you. This one you may already know, metadata. It was already working from the time of SEO, where you have metadata for each and every documentation. The title, the tags, the description. And then the second one is something that I just want to dwell on a bit. Canonical URLs. What are canonical URLs? For those people who write a lot, you've seen situations where, oh, you have a Substack, you have a Medium, you have a hash node, you have a dev.to, but you want to publish the same article across all 4 of them because it's a different audience, right? Now, the concept of canonical URLs are important because it helps these engines know the first document to rank in. Like, what am I ranking first? So if you published the same content in Hashnode, in Dev.to, in Substack, in Medium, you should set the one that should be a primary source so that when LLMs, machines, search engines are going through the docs, they're not struggling to decide for themselves, oh, which is the most important, which is the most recent, which is the most primary documentation that I should follow. And then version metadata. Again, additional information around your docs, like versioning and all of that. This one is something that people overlook a lot, and this is something that LLMs heavily rely on. Internal linking. Things like, you finished the whole guide, see also XYZ. Or before you start the guide, you should have JavaScript knowledge. Or you finished a task in the API documentation or the developer documentation, and you're doing more follow-up tasks on it. And then most importantly, how they can troubleshoot. Because the issue with troubleshooting is, if people get lost, people have issues when they try out your product, right? But if there's no clear troubleshooting steps, again, you have left ChatGPT and Gemini to do the reasoning for you themselves. And then this is kind of like the core or the epicenter of something that I would like to introduce to you today. It is called LLMs.text. It was introduced by Anthropic, and the reason is, even after all of this process, LLMs are still finding it hard, not just to retrieve, LLMs are getting better every day, so not just to retrieve accurate information, but to stay up to date. What do I mean? If we made a change this morning, sometimes ChatGPT can still be referring to our older documentation. So, a lot of companies are already adopting this. I'm going to show you a few, where just the same way you have a sitemap for your SEO, you have a markdown file to actually define the different headings and what they mean, put in description and metadata. So that's a brief sample of what it looks like in real life. And then these are a couple of companies that use them. Meatlify, I think, also uses them and is heavily pushing for this because they have inbuilt RAG systems, and they want to be able to provide accurate answers whenever people come to your documentation to ask questions. So, how do we wrap it up? Future-proofing your workflow. I just have 2 key points for future-proofing your work after you have done all of these steps. The first one is your CI/CD pipeline. Whatever process you have put in place in your company to be primary for how things are pushed to production, you should always involve documentation. I was speaking with a friend today, and we were talking about how in some Nigerian companies, you'll be the one to raise the PR, you'll be the one to review the PR, you'll be the one to merge the PR, right? So a couple of things that you can introduce: linters, automation checks. So always check, okay, is a paragraph too lengthy? Are we missing some heading structure in here? These things can, because oftentimes if you're working on a team, it's hard to spot these issues. So these things can easily check before your docs go live if you're missing anything for your LLMs. And then the final one is the actual test. You've done all the work, you've published your docs. Ask ChatGPT or whatever LLM you're integrating your docs into a question about your docs. Look at the places that the answers are being generated from. If the answers is not exactly clear, then that means you need to look again. You need to work on something on that session. You need to check where this information is cited from so that you can easily keep adapting it till it gets better for LLM. So again, it's important to know that it's not a one-size-fits-all process. It takes steps, step by step. It's a gradual process. Every time you keep improving your docs. Key takeaways from today that I'd like you to go home with. LLMs are your new readers, whether you like it or not. And we're slowly moving into a generation of engineering where people don't even understand the foundation anymore. Sadly, so they're always going to, I'm a culprit. We're always going to ask ChatGPT, we're always going to ask Gemini, we're always going to ask Claude. So if you want to reduce the amount of frustration for your users, you could burn out the time building a very great docs for human beings, but a very poor documentation for LLMs. So LLMs are your new readers. If your documentation is not speaking their language, they would not surface. Clarity, structure, and metadata will always give you a very good GEO success. Again, I've mentioned that we're not even moving, we're now fully in a GEO era where people are questioning the results of SEO. I mean, Google is doing amazing things, making sure that search results are ranking better, making sure that SEO is still doing amazing, but we're moving very fast to a GEO era. And if LLMs cannot pass your documentation, if LLMs can pass your documentation rather, humans will be able to thrive with your products. You will have a good churning rate. People will be able to use your product, love your product, refer your products. Customers will start paying for your product. And now, documentation is training data. Optimizing for GEO helps your project remain visible, top of mind for people, and authoritative in an AI-driven world. Gracias. Thank you. Do we have any questions? I was so on time. As soon as I said gracias, this thing said time up. Anyways. But yeah, do we have any questions before we wrap it up? Great. Amazing. I do hope that as you go back to your organizations, as you go back to that tiny product that you're building, great product that you're building, you really remember to put documentation first. Oh, we do have a question. Sorry. But why does he feel like he wants to roast me?
I just want to ask a question.
Okay, what?
So basically,
yeah.
My name is Abdurrahman, yeah? So I wanted to ask, what tool would you recommend for API documentations?
I need companies to come and pay me. Who are we pointing to? So great, there are amazing sets of tools. Earlier this morning, we had a session around Postman and how AI and all of that tools are working in them. So, but foundationally, before we even discuss tools, I think depending on the level of product that you have, it's very important to start thinking about how am I having structured documentation for my APIs, which means are you considering Open API or something else? Once you have that, you can easily integrate it anywhere. But if it's a very basic product, like you don't really have so much to deal with, Postman is a very good and everybody-friendly alternative, but we have tons of other documentation tools, right? If you're using things like Docs 360, you can document for both normal user guides and APIs. If you're using, I don't want to mention Gitbook anyways, but they're good now, so yeah. Gitbook is amazing. So yeah, but these are some tools that you can use depending on, there are a lot of things to consider. How large is the product? What are you using? Are you just documenting with tables? How are you planning to document it? But Postman, a very easy, friendly way because you can just be testing it and save that test and everything will be saved, parameter, example, everything, and you can have a very simple, good to start documentation.
All right, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, people. I do hope you have an amazing day in DevFest today. Have a fun day.